Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar, Build the Culture of Your Firm and the Brand Will Follow. My name is Kelty, and I would like to introduce your two presenters for today, Mark Bussey and Ben Garfinkel.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
Mark and Ben are partners in Industrial Brand, and we'll be talking about how branding can be used to captivate clients and to ignite a workforce. A few things before we get started. We will finish on time, possibly even early. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar in the chat box, and I will do my best to get Mark and Ben to answer as many of those as I can at the end. And lastly, most importantly, we will keep things relevant and moving along. We know everyone's time is valuable. So on that note, I will pass the floor to Mark to get started.
Thank you, Kelty. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark, and thanks for joining us today. First, let me just tell you a little bit about us. Ben and I started the firm about 17 years ago. We were a full-service communication and digital design studio, working for a wide range of clients from local startups and restaurants to large corporations and multinational brands and some retailers over the years. We've been providing brand strategy and communication design for a myriad of clients with an increasing focus of late on AEC, or the built environment sector, for the past 5 years or so. You may recognize some of the logos here, which represent a small sample of the brands we've worked with.
So we're going to start by taking a quick look at some lessons we've learned in our careers that could function as a sort of manifesto for successful branding. Years ago, many of us thought of brand in a more product and trade name sense, not the more intangible asset we know it to be today. What we've come to realize in recent years is that brand and culture are often interchangeable, or at least interrelated. A healthy brand builds trust among clients and employees, and it results in an environment that makes for a better experience for all stakeholders and ultimately impacts business's bottom line. So, consider this quote from Lego CEO and President Jürgen Vig Knudstrup, if I've said that correctly. In today's media-saturated society, only those who forcefully manage to stay true to themselves leave us with a lasting brand impression. To achieve that, you need to work hard to align actions with decisions such as strategy, culture, and identity support each other. Getting organizations to be true to themselves and align actions and decisions in ways that support strategy, culture, and identity is huge. Before making any marketing, communications, or media decisions, it's imperative that a brand live internally as the heart and soul of an organization's identity.
Exactly. An example of what Ben's talking about can be found in Mary Jo Hatch and Madgen Schultz's 2008 book, Taking Brand Initiative, which I recommend you snag a copy of. In it, they refer to something they call the VCI alignment model to express brand health. It's elegant in its simplicity. A strong organizational identity can only exist when internal vision, that's the V, what leadership want to accomplish, culture, that's the C, what is known or believed by employees, and images, the I, what its external stakeholders expect or desire from the company, are in alignment. When these three core components are misaligned, it's like a jigsaw puzzle being spread out on a table. The total entity loses focus and individual pieces become sort of incoherent. If a leader or a small group at the top suddenly decides to take a company in a certain direction, and they don't have buy-in, understanding, and support of their internal audiences and external stakeholders, it's not just a distraction, it can actually be dangerous.
That's right. It opens up gaps where the organizational identity can leak out. Dangerous outside influences can leach into the company's culture, for example. This reminds me of is JCPenney's failed attempt to rebrand recently. Remember that? From pricing to merchandise to store layout and design, it was an epic fail, and it cost them dearly. But why? The man who led the rebrand was Ron Johnson. He created the Apple stores. However, JCPenney is not Apple. Employee culture was misaligned with his new vision. Customers viewed the brand a certain way and craved a consistent experience. They wanted cheap chic, not geek chic, and the culture and the brand were out of sync. As Johnson discovered at JCPenney, you cannot rebrand a company without changing the culture. Had he paid more attention to internal branding, from gathering input to implementation to measuring behaviors, he might have had more success. Unfortunately, the research was flawed. They made assumptions. They ignored their core customers and their staff, and they tried to shove a new vision down everyone's throat. So,
I wonder, Ben, I wonder how much of this similar problem occurred with the recent Target, debacle in Canada. It was very interesting. Anyway, moving on. Despite how glamorous, we want to make sure everyone understands that a brand is not a logo. You've probably run into this concept before, but I just want to make sure that we're clear. Simply put, a logo is a visual business identifier, right? An identifier is all of the visual aspects that form part of an overall brand, but a brand is the value of a promise consistently kept. It's the sum total of story, narrative, experiences, and emotional perceptions over time. A logo is a vitally important visual component, of course, of a brand, as is a tagline, but there's so much more to consider. And branding can't fix a lousy product, by the way, or bad service, or certainly weak staff, ever. As Marty Neumeier said in his 2005 book, The Brand Gap, which some of you may have read, quote, "A brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is."
Yeah, and as brand designers, of course, the visual aspects of a brand are a big part of what we do. An industrial brand where maybe we used to spend 30% of our time asking, listening, and implementing, and about 70% of time on designing graphics. These days, it's the opposite. We spend about 70% of our time asking, listening, and implementing, and only about 30% of that designing. Yes, you could spend probably less initially trying to solve a brand problem with just graphic design, but you really get what you pay for. And in most cases, that's a half measure. When you look at the entire brand, it's not difficult to justify spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on rebranding. Investigating and confronting the real organizational challenges takes time, it takes effort and resources, and you have to be prepared to incur those if you're hoping to make a real difference.
I hear a lot of marketing experts talk about how valuable branding is, about how brand influences internal and external processes, and from business development to, communication flow, or from client interactions to the way they engage with employees. And this is all true. I agree with them. But more than ever, the environment you cultivate within your organization, including your brand, will be what helps attract and retain the best talent and provide the most positive work atmosphere for your team. But if we're honest, we really feel like lots of branding is still rooted in traditional 20th century marketing and advertising thinking, and therefore rather ineffective. So seldom are actual customers at the center of brand experience, and so much time, energy, and money is wasted on marketing communications that may have worked, 25 years ago, but are simply lost on modern audiences. Today, branding must start from within an organization, with employees, partners, channels, distributors, suppliers, etc., and it was to work its way out. We're getting tired of brand designers who say they do branding. It's simply not true most of the time. Even when we get to know an organization's external and internal audiences and get deeply into an organization's soul to help reveal their true identities, branding requires the firm to have vigilance, buy-in, and commitment to this process. I like to tell people that branding is a verb, actually. It's an action over time, and it's really up to them to do it. It's up to you guys.
Here's a thought. Rebranding can actually be bad for a company. Do it wrong, and you could be worse off. Seriously. Like, we've seen this, more than once, increasingly in recent years as people's awareness, exposure, and response to corporate marketing have changed. The old hierarchy of effects approach to marketing based on psychology, the theories from the likes of Pavlov and Skinner, they're just not effective anymore. Firms are far more complex, audiences more sophisticated. Not only that, but it's more important than ever for brands to also consider existing and potential employees.
Absolutely. It reminds me, we were engaged recently by a large and rapidly growing local company here we're based in Vancouver. They were all about design and innovation. They were even considered the highest quality in their category. Some of you might guess who I'm talking about, but that's fine. They were growing so fast that they'd lost control and the brand was actually suffering. While attending some meetings with leadership and we were digging into their situation, I visited the bathroom, as I'm often want to do, not just because I have to go use it, but I want to check out what goes on in the toilet, in the toilet, in the washroom. In it,
That does not sound good.
not a good visual. Anyway, in the bathroom, I found a mess. Tattered old posters on the wall, magazines littered across the floor that were 3 years old. I mean, so much for innovation, right? Organizations love to use meaningless aspirational language about values, but then the state of their bathroom is actually a really good indicator of workplace culture and alignment or misalignment within their brand. In this particular case, it definitely validated that we had a real brand problem on their hands they have to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, you see that a lot in restaurants too. Like, we just have this one thing going on in the front.
I always look in the washroom at a restaurant and make a decision on, because I know if what it looks like in a washroom says something about what's going on in the kitchen, right?
Well, you got it. Can totally change your impression. And you know what? That's a great segue to the corporate world, right? Like you can, the way a receptionist greets a visitor or a shipping clerk or somebody else answers the phone, it's a pretty useful indicator of brand health and culture. But bear in mind that unless they also, unless they're working in the marketing and creative department, the staff really, they rarely care much about the brand vis-a-vis the logo, the colors, and the fonts, etc. What they do care about is culture. They care about atmosphere, doing great work, and fitting in with colleagues. The guy in accounting has to, they have to connect to your firm's brand as strongly as the creative leaders, and it's not going to be from a fancy logo or a beautiful stationery design. So we're going to skip over that discussion today and leave that one for another time. But an industrial brand, we employ a comprehensive process to assess brand health and develop a strategy. And today we're going to touch on a few of them, some tips and things that we find helpful and that you can also try applying to your business.
So let's get started by talking a little bit about brand audits. What's a brand audit, right? We typically start an internal review of every possible brand touch point and all existing marketing collateral we have, we can find. We're looking for, the positives, the stuff they do well, the stuff they struggle with, the negatives, gaps, opportunities, and what have you, the contradictions. Then we spend time inside that organization, observing the daily routines and responsibilities of staff and immersing ourselves in the culture while doing as many interviews, surveys, and focus groups as were permitted. If you go to our website and do a quick search for Brand Strength Assessment Worksheet, you can download a form that'll just give you some guides of the sort of things we look for, and you can sort of ask yourself, how effective are we doing with a vision statement? Does it make sense? What's a SWOT? Do we have a SWOT analysis? Are we well positioned? So go try that for yourself.
So speaking of surveys, it's surprising how often leadership tries to force a new brand, identity, or messaging without identifying what's truly going on in the minds of those affected by their brand. A less sophisticated design firm would accept a prescription for a new identity, like, hey, we need a new logo, great, let's do it. But we work hard to resist any further assumptions and engage in what we call our phase zero process, which has a money-back guarantee. So we use this to find out what makes a company really tick before making any recommendations to engage in branding initiatives. During this phase, we're trying to uncover as much about the brand as we can, broadly, not just from the people who are close and have really great things to say, but we really want to dig and we want to survey as deeply as possible both current and past clients, senior and junior staff, and clients, and ask some really pointed questions. Things like, do you think your impression of the company matches that of the industry in general? And were there a suitable project to award tomorrow? Is there anything preventing you from giving it to this company. And what this process reveals is what's really going on inside and outside the organization, things leadership didn't maybe even know, and what it will take to deliver on the brand promise. Without doing this step, we're guessing.
Another step in our process we often do, and that you can do yourself, is develop key personas of your target audience. And you probably have different kinds of audiences too, right? Well, who are they? You absolutely must understand who you're serving. What do they look like? I mean, are they married? Are they old? Are they young? What are their hobbies, their priorities, their hopes, their dreams? What motivates them in all aspects of their lives? Um, this photo and description is from a recent project we did for a fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle consumer brand, where we actually had actors record statements of their lives. I won't play that for you right now, but that's why there's a play button there. We had I think 3 different personas, each with a recording of somebody describing their life. This was really helpful for the leadership and our team, as we referenced back and to it often and use it as a touchstone and a litmus as the brand emerged. Like would Gary do that? Would Gary think this way?
Yeah, and what kind of music does your audience listen to? Could you create a soundtrack, for example? Sometimes we do this as part of the process to get deeper insights into an organization's personality and values, and think about like the dialogue and the debate that goes into deciding as a group what's on an album's worth of music. Literally, it can be quite beneficial in establishing real brand attributes.
Words are a huge component of a robust brand, and so are visuals, of course, but they must align. So we often use word association and experiment with verbal and visual language to help identify what a brand is, and often more importantly, what a brand is not. By the way, while competitive analysis, examining the landscape against which you're competing, is super important, it's often overemphasized in researching brand identity, too often leading to inauthentic and reactive solutions which really lack meaning, right? For example, you don't want to start Googling right away all the competitors in the sector, decide that everyone uses red, so you choose blue. That's the wrong motivation. That's the wrong reason to choose a color or whatever. And so we really try to keep this to a minimum and try to develop this language alignment and clarity with our clients as we go. So there's embedded meaning. Effective brands are only created when an organization honestly analyzes what it is that they do best. They also need to realize where they stumble and what the internal and external forces that they face are. This is similar, of course, to, we call it a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We collect opinions and perspectives from all sources, external stakeholders, interviewing partners, past customers. Hey, the customer who fired you might be exactly the right person to talk to about how your brand promise. And of course, prospects, the people you want to do business with. What are their needs? It often surprises us how unwilling clients can be to give us access to these people, considering how valuable that info can be and how much profit potential lies in those exchanges. In a recent engagement, the firm leadership gave us a brief that sort of boldly described their strengths and the thing they did best and that they stood for and the challenges that they were dealing with. But when we did one-on-one interviews, it turned out that the thing that they thought they did best was actually a mess, and it was mocked by staff and vendors and clients alike. We even found one regular client who explained that they were not going to award a large project to them, very well suited for them, because of the way they handled the last one. However, because of the sincere intention behind the brand initiative and the changes that were made, and in the whole brand experience, not just a new logo, that client actually changed their mind and awarded them that work after all. That was very gratifying for us to do that.
It's always gratifying, and especially when you take the time to really do that digging and connect with people. And certainly as we start pulling all this information together, stuff that Mark talked about, we begin to form the basis of what we call a brand essence. And a brand essence captures values, captures the personality of the organization, reasons to believe, like why anybody would believe or say certain things about us. It has like real evidence, emotional and physical benefits of interacting, plus symbols, facts, and icons that make up the brand universe. And at the center of this model is a single expression of purpose, the one primary reason organizations exist and the answer to the question, what are we about? To do this well, you have to be really honest about the beliefs, the capabilities, the aspirations, the feelings, and the motivations as you identify language that fits with your organization. And then you have to use it to develop messages to your internal and external stakeholders.
Look, the marketplace is filled to overflowing with rhetoric these days, isn't it? I mean, everybody's talking about how different or special each company, product, or service is. And this is just kind of more bullshit, isn't it? There's no logo or website or ad campaign that we could design for you to sell that anymore. Company leaders who try to build aspirational brands too often think grandiose promises about what they do or offer and how they do it as being somehow superior in some way will build their brand. People are more jaded than ever. They need to buy into what you're selling. And if staff aren't stoked about what they do, they're not going to love your brand and in turn produce great work either.
Yeah, our clients, they often tell us that a growing challenge is attracting good employees. The rise of the Generation Y millennials has kicked off a sea change in how branding and marketing is used, or maybe more accurately, not used to address this. But millennials aside, younger and older audiences these days demand much more than a paycheck. For example, in the built environment sector we focus on, this has been compounded by a reduced number of young professionals graduating from architecture, design, and engineering schools, which creates real challenges in acquiring and retaining good talent.
This is the golden circle from our friend Simon Sinek, which some of you hopefully are familiar with. His Start With Why TED Talk is amazing. His book is a great read. I recommend it to everybody. But in it, if you're not familiar with it, he argues that effective leadership with power and influence is actually found most where traditional modes of thinking, marketing, and business goes beyond what they do. That's really the easy stuff. That's the obvious stuff. Even deeper than the details about process or features or whatever. Often these are used in marketing as differentiators or unique selling proposition marketing fodder. And it actually embraces the underlying motivations behind a company and what it does, its purpose. The reason I bring this up is that our experience has taught us that the most effective brands aren't the prettiest or the boldest, but those that inspire trust.
Yeah, totally. I mean, at its core, branding is really about that trust. It's about honesty. This model, the Golden Circle model, and the Brand Essence model that we just reviewed are both paths to get our clients to this very naked, true self. The core idea that unites everyone and all business messages and activities. So not only does management need this to clarify and focus in order to build an effective brand, but the most effective brands are those that are able to infuse these consistently throughout the entire experience for clients and for employees.
Yeah, for sure. There's often friction when trying to get internal brand adoption, attributable to workers thinking that a new brand identity is merely a facade, or the whole initiative is smoke and mirrors, and often they're unwilling to commit to it. I promise you that some, maybe even many, people are going to hate your new logo or some aspect of your identity, let's say. Expect that. Deal with it. It's part of change management. And of course, the logo is not your brand anyway, right? A common mistake we've seen is when leadership decides they've figured out a brilliant new brand strategy and just announces it unexpectedly on their staff and engages in some shallow cheerleading exercise. Those you've asked to champion and implement a brand must have contributed to the strategy behind it, or you will probably fail.
Yeah, I mean, this happened at a really large AEC firm not too long ago when the CEO gleefully called an all-staff meeting to dramatically reveal the fancy new logo and identity system he'd cooked up with some designers with virtually no consultation from within. It was terrible. And if you know the identity itself, and this might give it away, you'll appreciate why it got the nickname Tony the Tiger in a Blender. That was what the staff dubbed it.
Yep.
And yeah, this CEO's approach totally backfired. Resulted in a company-wide rebrand several years later, probably not soon enough. And just keep this in mind. Like most of us, we're not Steve Jobs, and if you believe that he really used the people don't know what they want visionary maverick approach that's become his mythology, then we wish you luck. Brand affects culture, whether you like it or not. But if you share with your team what's happening, along with as much rationale as you can, and it's not all of it. I mean, you obviously have to keep some things, in the sort of management circle and not shared. But in that way, you'll build trust, you'll reduce resistance, and most importantly, you'll get that lasting buy-in that is what we're really looking for in this whole thing.
But keep in mind, consensus needs to be weighted, right? You're not going to get everybody, even in your management team, to totally agree with everything. You'll never please everyone, so make decisions strategically and ask your leadership team to support the group's decision. Once you've arrived at a place where there's a general agreement on brand essence, the core stuff, that you want to get as much agreement as possible, including the language surrounding purpose and message. Use this information to translate your brand into criteria, or what we would call filters, that you can use to assess whether something is suitable for inclusion in your brand universe and guide behaviors. More importantly, translate your behavior into principles to guide these expected behaviors from your staff so they know how to live the brand every day.
Mm-hmm. So this is what we're talking about here. We call them brand filters, brand actions, behaviors, but we always translate that more detailed brand essence, the big idea, into straightforward and easy to follow criteria, these little ideas. And these are a powerful way to deliver a consistent internal and external experience and to help define, unify, and align culture. So ultimately, we're bringing this brand purpose to life through those in the organization. It's a huge benefit to HR, to recruitment, to performance reviews. So you can even quantify how the brand is doing through performance reviews, through these actions, and it empowers staff to hold each other accountable for behaviors and actions. However, never forget that your team is watching, and they're expecting you as their leader to embody the brand through your own actions most of all. So, how do we do this? Always launch a brand internally well before a public release, and immediately start to walk the talk. If your staff don't understand the brand, you can be pretty sure that others outside the company won't either. So you have to show the staff, use examples, reward, consequence, risk, and investment. Show them you mean it, and be open about company vision, the strategy behind it all. You will want to embed brand language into onboarding and training, and embody the brand as fully and publicly with as much evidence of brand values as possible. So things like fun days, specific training, coaching, use staff perks, volunteerism, customer connections, etc. All of these need to be embedded excuse me, into the workplace. A manifesto, sayings on posters, team clothing, gears, banners, maybe even a contest.
There are many examples we can borrow from sports and church, actually. Tell stories about overcoming obstacles and the big company wins like they do in the locker rooms of sports teams, and create mythology about manifestations of the belief system like they do in religion. If you're able to develop and express common goals and experiences with staff, earn their trust, and find ways to make them a fabric of the brand, the effect can result in alignment and integration, which ultimately optimizes business performance. These images here are from a recent internal brand launch we produced where staff from multiple offices came together to engage in day-long team builder and training about the brand, discussions, even games where they created art that best captured the new brand, and a party with branded cupcakes, of course. Got to have cupcakes.
Tasty ones, right?
Absolutely.
So the other thing that's really important to consider is creating, I think it's critical, frankly, but consider creating an employee handbook together with marketing and human resources that explains to staff the rationale behind the new brand. Something that sets forth these behavioral benchmarks based on core values. The things like that give employees a clear path to achieving success for the firm through simple day-to-day actions and behaviors. Then get out of the way, trust your team, and launch. Now, before you switch to slide, Mark, this is something else that is very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that happens, as you're about to launch. Um, it would probably be very easy to fall into the trap of having no time left or no effort that you want to expend to do this. But do not use stock photography here if you're going to use photography. Take the time to shoot pictures of your actual staff here. This is so important. If you're not authentic here, it's just not going to be authentic anywhere. This isn't going to resonate with anybody if you're using, pictures of like stock photography people to all of your
Well, stock photography aside, what this booklet is the expression of in this particular case for a company called Omicron that we worked with, where we actually took their core brand principles and created a brand guide for staff, for the internal team, not embedded and lost in some huge employee handbook that has all the other stuff that needs to be a part of that, but separate and clear and something that literally, if you look at the bottom of the second page, questions that staff can ask themselves about how what the brand stands for can be manifest in their own behaviors. It's great stuff. But yeah, you don't want to use stock photo here anyway. This statement may seem crazy and counterintuitive, especially considering that's what we sort of do for a living here. But the truth is, but there is truth in it, rather. Unless you have millions to spend establishing a brand position through traditional, branding and advertising and marketing, it can be quite ineffective, actually. Modern audiences are well informed, empowered, and often flighty. And brand decisions are not simple, linear, or fact-driven, but motivated by the interplay of emotions, experiences, and sensations.
Marketing at people doesn't work anymore. But you can engage them through an authentic brand story. In fact, the best stories are the ones that you don't tell. Others tell them for you. Yes, get your brand story down. Make sure for sure that everybody in the organization knows it too. However, it takes consistently delivering on your brand promise to create the, hopefully positive experiences that people will have, that people will remember, and that they will share.
For sure. A powerful lesson that we've learned over the past couple of decades of designing brands is that they are only valuable if they're controlled and used consistently and embedded into the culture and workflow of an organization. Print-based style guides, these lovely lookbooks that people produce, and even PDFs and all the digital fodder that gets gathered into folders on servers and such. They get lost. They get out of date immediately. Which is why we deliver brand platforms as a single online source to visually capture every piece of a brand identity and its related materials. And we even developed our own platform we call Managed Brand to do this. You can read about this if you just look up Managed Brand or style guides on our website. You'll find some stuff on that there. By creating this sort of single, unwavering asset management tool for our clients, it ensures nothing gets lost and everyone stays on course. We protect the integrity of the brand, so to speak. It becomes a sort of a way for all staff to easily access and understand the brand from anywhere, allowing consistency and dissemination of information and assets. It can even be used as a training tool during the onboarding process if set up correctly. And we don't really have time to go into it too deeply today, but feel free to connect with either one of us after the session, and we'd love to show you what this looks like. As I said, you can also look up Managed Brand on our website.
So as Mark and I wrap up, remember that a brand must be applied consistently in all areas of the business, and it has to be monitored, measured, and fine-tuned over time. So regularly ask stakeholders how they think the company is living up to its brand promise. We're amazed how seldom companies do staff surveys. Measure progress and success. Literally, these can port into performance evaluations. The activity of asking clients these questions is a branding activity in of itself. And clients are like, wow, they're actually taking the time to ask me these questions. And these evaluations can contribute to an understanding of how the brand is progressing as a whole. So be patient. Building a brand takes time and resources. And remember, it takes lots of them.
Also remember, businesses are complicated and they come in, many varieties and forms. So decide on your own truth for your company's brand and realize that many of the things that we've just shared today, you can do yourself and you can apply these in your organizations.
Yeah, and an underlying message today is that true brand value is not often found in the areas of your business that directly affect your bottom line. We really understand how difficult that can be. Real branding is about building relationships with audiences that no longer appreciate or respond well to traditional outbound marketing or advertising. Here's a quote. I really like this. Too many companies want their brands to reflect some idealized, perfected image of themselves. As a consequence, their brands acquire no texture, no character, and no public trust. That was Richard Branson. So, be real, be honest, don't be different, be outstanding. But remember that your entire company should be considered your branding department. Otherwise, you're doomed. Some of this might not be entirely new to you, but I hope it serves as a reminder and inspires you to take a look at how you can apply some of these lessons in your own organizations.
And please remember, branding is bullshit if not done right. And a designer can't build your brand. Only you can. In fact, a brand is never finished, ever. Branding is a verb, so go do it.
Thank you, Mark and Ben. We do have time for a few questions now, so we'll start getting to them now. The first one for Mark: do you find businesses often overlook voice, tone, and language when trying to build their brands?
Overlook voice, tone, and language. That's a great question. I mean, yeah, of course. Otherwise, Ben and I would be out of work. When we do it, it's that's not the case. But it's not uncommon. I mean, it's partially evident when you look at all the generic sort of copy and rhetoric out there. And if you review marketing collateral or web copy from competitors in an industry, you'll see a lot of that. People are all saying the same things without saying anything about who they really are. It's also less common in B2C, I suppose, but boy, do we see it a lot in the B2B sphere. I guess it stems from the brand personality that's developed, right? That's so critical. Communications don't always take the form of written words, but you need a sort of foundational guidance to direct communications, and to do that, tone and personality and making sure that the voice is well defined is really important. There's lots of examples that pop to mind, of course, but one thing I've seen done poorly is when a company has a very sort of stoic brand presence, and then all of a sudden runs a campaign and they suddenly decide to use humor. It can really be jarring. It can come off as completely inauthentic and have a negative impact. It has to be used very cautiously. Ben, anything else come to mind on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, brand tone and language is so critical just in general. I think you did a good job answering that one.
What's next?
I have a question I think would be a good one for Ben here. How can the written story complement the visual one to build a more compelling brand?
Well, that's actually quite similar to the last question that we had. They can't really exist without each other. I mean, if you think about it, like you look at a person and you only have part of their story, and until they actually open their mouth and start talking, you don't really have a good sense of the entire brand of that person. And these days people tend to respond initially to visuals. They're just, that's how we work. We don't really have a lot of time to read words, but if we don't have a tone and language and that personality that that we just talked about established when we're working on the written form of our brand, we really don't have a whole lot, and that's really, really important. It has to be crafted. We have to engage people with the personality that we're going, to use for our brand, and both the visual side and the written side are meant to be compelling entry into all of the other things that we need to say. And speaking of things that we need to say, one of the things, I would say, don't shy away from bold or impactful statements. Just just try to be very clear and singular in communication as well, rather than trying to answer everything with or say a whole lot of stuff in long sentences and convoluted words. And the reason why is that you will start to lose people, and you will start to sound generic and rhetoric-y if you start to kind of by committee take away the things that might be a little bit more provocative. For example, I'm not saying be provocative. I'm just saying be careful not to water down your messages and your personality as you're going through that process of working out your brand in written form.
And that could also be applied to the visual language, right, Ben? I mean, being super,
Oh, yeah.
confusing in all of the visual cues, and like you mentioned, stock photography, you can really lose the plot, right? And your audience doesn't know what you're talking about anymore.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Okay, next question we have. What are some of the best examples and why that you have seen of brands using key spokesmen or influencers to further their image or cause? I know that Red Bull is an example here, but do you have any others?
Well, I mean, Richard Branson earlier mentioned it. That's a great one. There's lots of brands will use that sort of brand hero character. Old Spice does this. In Canada, a couple of the big retail operations, the Bay often has Hudson's Bay Company, I think the oldest company in Canada, often has their president as the voice of the brand. I don't really like the crazy tones. Kind of turns me off, but I think they've done a
Yeah.
decent job of it.
I didn't like her at first, but I do
No,
now more.
it was used so consistently, right? That
Yeah.
it became sort of their sound, right? That
Yeah.
gravelly sound. But Superstore has the Weston family. Galen Weston is a really great another example. But it's not always such a good choice, right? I mean, it's very susceptible to one person suddenly being the carrier for all of the brand attributes, and if they live a terrible personal life and things go weird, it can really negatively affect the
Yeah.
brand if
You know
the
what
long
though?
run.
Yeah, and it's really more the exception in the AEC and the professional services world where you'd have a spokesperson like that, unless for example you're a star architect or something.
Yeah.
More often than not, what we find is that it's a corporate voice. It's the voice of many, and as such, it makes it even more important to like make sure that the stuff that we're talking about, which is establishing your brand and your organizational culture, and making sure that the brand language and tone and values is really well developed and structured and then communicated internally
Hmm.
as to brief all of the employees, because it's a flipping of the model. Like, all of the employees at every level in a company are the spokespeople of the company.
That's
So
right.
call them unofficial or not if you want to, but they really actually literally are the official spokespeople of the company more often than not.
Darn right.
Okay, I have a question here on the brand assessment worksheet that we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
And the question is, how often do you recommend doing an internal brand audit to check if you are getting off track?
Oh wow, yeah, wow, that's a great question. Thanks. We talked about measurement, and I have found in my career that in these situations, it's really easy to talk about measuring and keeping your eye on this sort of thing. But once you get busy and the job's done, and the marketing team's been handed their fancy new toolkit, and off goes the president and the biz dev people and the HR people focusing on the things that they do, years can go by without anyone going, hey, did that work? Are we tracking this? My recommendation would be a couple of things, and don't go into our business, by the way, if you're a young designer wants to be a brand strategist listening. It's if you do this good enough, if you're good at it, you end up having clients pay you and they come and then they're gone, right? That you make yourself almost unnecessary if you do a good enough job. But nevertheless, what I would suggest is this: every year it should be something that is tracked. I mean, big organizations are constantly measuring the goodwill of the organization, and that's tied to the equity in the marketplace. And I think that it would be amazing if the health of the culture internally was considered part of the brand itself. And maybe as a young or as a marketing professional inside the marketing group, maybe it's your job to kind of push upstream and make sure that the HR people and the senior management are aware of any issues that you're seeing or anything that's working or not working that you're observing, and make sure that they include that. It's on their list once a year when they get together for their big corporate retreat or the shareholders meeting. This should be a conversation. There should be some metric, some data, some report back. So maybe that's a once a year survey. Maybe if the organization is really about building trust, maybe all year long there's kind of an open door policy where complaints or success stories can be captured and categorized and acted upon. But at least, is there an easy answer to this? I don't know. I certainly don't think that once you have a fancy logo and toolkit and your website's beautiful, you can just ignore it for a few years.
Yeah, well, brands are really dynamic, and you have to recognize that they go astray, and they just sometimes grab a life of their own. And our job, both, I don't mean our as an industrial brand necessarily. I mean the job of the people that are, running and keeping their eyeballs on the brand in the organization, is to really recognize two things. One, when it's, heading in the right direction and build on it, and when it's being misused or heading in the wrong direction and curtail that. And you know what? It's super important also to make sure there are brand champions in the organization that have some power to do stuff about that.
Thanks, Ben. We have time for a few more questions. I'd just like to go through a couple of housekeeping items. If we don't get to your question, please contact us. Our website is displayed there, ideas@industrialbrand.com, our Twitter handle @industrialbrand, and our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/industrialbrand. Hopefully we'll get to most of your questions. We do have time for a few more, but if we don't, we'd love to hear from you. And on that note, I have a question. This is a great question. In the building design market, how do you see branding for engineering firms as different compared to architecture firms?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. It's complicated. I know when I go to meetings with engineers, I wear a bow tie because they think differently. Yeah, they're different.
They like to put onion skins over our project timelines and stuff, where our architects like to put onion skins and sketch over design work.
Yeah, there's different priorities. I'll say. I would say this though. Hey, jump in here, Ben, if you want. But the architecture business has changed. The technology they use has changed. It's more competitive than ever. It's hard. Getting and keeping talent is harder than ever, and a lot of the things that they provide their clients is being embedded into the engineering and integrated build firms. And so marketing engineering has taken on a new, for engineering and for architects, really, branding, having a story, making sure that you can express what it is you stand for, what you do, the way you do it, why someone would want to work for you or hire you, is becoming increasingly important. Ben mentioned the millennials earlier. They demand it. They don't care as much about just how much you're going to pay me or what you did in the past. They want to know the rest of it, what you stand for, and that brand comes in at that point. Engineers, we do find when we're selling our services and making sure that the perception of the value of marketing, because engineering and a lot of professional services come from a history where they didn't do marketing. They weren't even for a while. They weren't allowed to do marketing. It was, look, it's in the public safety, in the public's best interest to just do the job at the standard sort of industry rate. Well, that's all coming undone. Everybody's now competing more than ever, so with engineering firms, they definitely like math. They like bottom lines. They're very oriented on that. So Ben and I have to make sure that when we're educating them, that we're talking about the actual value and impact and benefit to them. So it has to be a really comprehensive rationale.
Plus the industry is changing a little bit too. I mean, the traditional role of the architect as the prime consultant, and likely the engineer being part of the sub-consultants is
changed.
Blurring. But I mean, still, I think engineers are finding that they need to communicate their unique sort of service offering, and their main target audience a lot of the times is still the architect, and so they're wanting to appeal to an architectural sensibility, which is through design sometimes, and a lot of the time. And but also that level of capability, and they're oftentimes worried about looking too designy, or maybe just like not serious enough as engineers.
Right.
Whereas the architects, they do have that sort of visual focus, but their engineers are their partners more often than not, and their clients are others. So there's like some different audience-based sort of stuff that influences branding in those two scenarios in the industry for sure.
I'd like to switch gears here for a minute and talk about a question that came in, or throw out a question that came in about staff, which we all know is very important. In the presentation, you spoke about getting out of your employees' way once you have provided them with proper brand guidelines. Can you give me a positive example of this happening and the result?
Wow, yeah. Well, trust, right? I mean, trust is difficult. You have teams of people, sometimes dozens, hundreds maybe of staff, all tasked. You can't expect everyone to just go forth and be prophet of the brand and behave this way. Anyway, I had an interesting experience last year. I was in Vancouver, the City Hall Engagement Task Force, and it was a curious look at how it was really the sort of the brand of the city was manifest through the relationships that citizens had with each other, their communities, and their government. And in that process, one of the things that came up was a very fascinating story. I think it was Copenhagen. The city hall there actually formed this sort of brand kit for citizens that included, here's who we are, here are the things we do, we behave, whatever. And they gave the keys to their social media accounts, Twitter, for instance, to citizens. So every month, a different citizen of Copenhagen is driving their Twitter feed that the world can
get. A little risky, hey?
Quite risky, sure, but but fascinating. I mean, fascinating. I would never do that necessarily, but if you look at a local a Canadian firm that's doing quite well is Dialogue, and they brought a number of different firms together under one culture, under one brand promise, with this one philosophy. And one of the things that they did to manifest that externally was they created an amazing opportunity for people to be trusted with expressing their inspirations and their projects and their finds and their thinking and their opinions through their Instagram and Twitter and other social, Pinterest and such. And all of this stuff is fed into the official Dialogue website feed. And it's a fascinating expression of getting out of the way and letting people be the brand for you. It's remarkable.
Yeah. Well, it says something about you too, right? Regardless of what those people end up doing.
Yeah.
You're saying volumes.
Well, not like Ben said earlier. Not everything needs to be revealed. Well, in the same way, of course, you don't want to give too much freedom to everybody. But I will say this: if you haven't identified who you are, if you don't have clarity on brand, if you haven't done this work, don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, we have time for one more question today. I'm going to throw it out to Ben. Any thoughts on how to effectively align the selection of new employees to ensure their fit with the brand?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our thoughts kind of were collected in the last hour almost of all the stuff that we were talking about. And so I guess the thing is, taking the time to have a really, really strong, clear brand, documented and internally sort of throughout the culture of the organization would be a really great step, first of all, because that will allow the organization to be very transparent externally about who you are, like in an authentic way that will start out by attracting the right candidates. It'll also allow staff, and I mean not just like senior staff, but like actually having people that are potential candidates come in and have interviews with different people in the organization, report back on their feeling in terms of whether or not that potential employee will be a good fit for the organizational culture. So there's definitely some strong power in being able to have the people in the organization with a strong culture and brand identity knowledge assessing potential people that are coming into that culture, for sure. And having that, the employee handbook and some of the other brand asset management tools like Manage Brand available to share with potential employees is another great thing to do, because they'll have a really good sense of that, and hopefully deeper sense, and maybe even a deeper desire to work there. So, hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
A little bit of a repeating theme here that would be to the importance of making sure that your HR people, those who kind of control the staff hiring and policies and all that stuff, they should really be a part of the brand development team, or certainly the brand management team, right?
I mean, the earlier into the branding process, the better for HR, frankly, because they're usually the ones that push behavioral change and manage behavioral sort of considerations in an organization, beyond performance reviews, but just as a general sort of forward motion.
Right.
So having them involved, they're the ones that really have a good way of bringing that in the correct and sensitive manner and stuff.
Well, I think that's a good tip.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. Just so you know, a copy of the webinar will be up on our site in the next day or two. So if you missed anything or want to hear any aspects of this presentation again, watch for that on our site. If you have any questions we didn't get to today, please send to us. We'd be certainly happy to answer them for you. And lastly, just please reach out to us anytime, email, Twitter, Facebook, or just an old-fashioned phone call. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, everyone.